Da 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 da! What's my good cheer? Welcome, welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never popped into one of my lives, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside, and I do it for my own movement, but I show up here fresh like a loaf of bread. Sometimes with a story of an experience I had that day or that week or sometime in my past. Sometimes it's a lesson that I pick up on YouTube or a conversation that I popped into. Sometimes, right? More often than not, I wouldn't say that, but my fair share in those hiccups and those obstacles and those problems and those things that we need to do in order, right, to move towards those things that we would love, right, that we desire in our lives. We could all just sit there on our haunches, but I think we would be waiting a very, very long time for those things that we want, right? If we didn't make that movement forward. I'm just coming in from uh, a video that I was just watching, and I had to come out of it, and I says, "Oh, Cindy, just go live, right?" Because we were talking yesterday, it hit a chord with me, a little trigger, right? It was, oh, what's that all about, right? The trigger that it hit was I was talking yesterday, and we were talking about genuineness and stuff. And I was talking a little bit about judging, how I was a judger, right? That sometimes in our hypervigilance and in our trauma, right, it's just part of our programming, right? That we have to make these deductions, sometimes our own very own lives, even if it's in our own minds. That's important, right? That our safety, right, comes first. And in that, we do a lot of analyzing, right? A lot of biting into, chewing it, right? Digesting it, a lot of tearing it apart and putting it back together. And I was in this lesson right now. Somebody very renowned, somebody who knows his stuff, somebody I wouldn't have been in there taking the lesson unless I knew I was going to get a lesson, right? But he hit that trigger. He hit that nodule in me that just gets me like this. And he really, really targeted the cigarette smokers in his conversation, right? He mocked them with those coughs, right? He mentioned it a few times in his presentation, right? About the smokers and how you should quit smoking and all the, right? Already, this is part of his congregation. These are his sheep. These are his flock, and already that person is going to feel guilt and shame because being highly sensitive and being empathic, we look to things to help to calm the system down so that we can, right, show up in our lives, right? Or show up even in what we need to do, let alone what we want to do. And sometimes we get knocked down in that. Sometimes, the people that we care about the most, sometimes those people that we admire the most, they hit those triggers. I'm not a smoker, you guys, but I was a smoker, and I can put myself in the shoes of a smoker because I did a lot of step down work. For me, it's baby steps. And sometimes in those baby steps, you have to let go of some of those big things that we cling to for our lives, right? Those things that help to calm the system down, right? And one of those is smoking, right? But for me, stepping down off a lot of those things that I was compulsed about, and when I say stepping down, I mean stepping down to something lesser in order that I could get a handle on that one problem that was so big and so massive that you need that crutch sometimes, right? You know, I say, oh my goodness, thank goodness it was cigarettes that he looked to for calming the system down, right? Probably not great. I agree it's not great. But who am I to judge? Because maybe if that person didn't have that cigarette, maybe he would have been shooting up with heroin. Maybe he would have filled his tumbler up with whiskey and downed that, right? And even in me saying that, here I am judging in that, right? The heroin and the alcohol, when the heroin and the alcohol could actually be a step down from something even bigger, right? In our addiction, in those things that we do to help calm the system down. For me, for most of you who've hung out with me for any length of time, you knew I used to be a compulsive gambler. I was addicted to those video lottery terminals. I wanted to be social. I was always a very social person and I wanted to be around people. But being introverted, right? I'm an extroverted introvert. I would be in these public places but with a focus in the machine right in front of me, and I was always looking for the big win, and I always went for that high of the adrenaline when I got a jackpot or something. And even if I did win, I would put more in, and I always lost. I always lost. That was a huge addiction that I would cry myself to sleep. I would lie to my husband about why I wasn't bringing tip money home, right? I would shuffle the house bills. I would buy the cheapest groceries just to manage to get us through the week. I would borrow money off of people, right? And put that borrowed money right into the machines in the hoping of recouping what I had lost. But I had to step down from that. And sometimes it isn't our choices. Sometimes, right? We know we could make better choices. Sometimes that thing we're stepping down from is so big that we can't just go cold turkey, right? Because we'll pull our hair out or pull somebody else's hair out or have a nervous breakdown or buy it, or even worse, just do it, go cold turkey, knowing that you won't be able to hold it up, right? Because you have nothing to help to get you through that. I am very, very grateful because my step down was an amazing choice, right? The day, well, it wasn't a day, it was a process. It was, right? Probably took me a couple of years, but it was wanting to invest in my brand. It was starting my YouTube channel in 2013, but posting videos 2014. I became addicted to building my brand, right? What an amazing addiction, because in that addiction, it helped me to learn and grow in other aspects of my life and to even understand what a coping mechanism was, right? I'm grateful. I didn't know that YouTube was going to be a coping mechanism, right? When all I dreamed and all I wished for and what I cried myself to sleep every night was to be able not to have to gamble. And I would go to bed at night, with every penny lost and more, saying, I'm never going to touch those machines again. And then the very next day, go right back to it. It's one of the big reasons why my marriage fell apart, right? There are contributing factors, right? Most likely that gambling was a symptom, right? And not necessarily a cause of my problems, but it was how I coped. And so when we judge, right? When we judge, we have to keep in mind that when we judge on somebody's behaviors or their habits or those things that they do, right? Pink ice donuts with sprinkles, that you can judge and say, oh my goodness, fatso, oh my goodness, you're such a loser for putting all your money on in the gambling machine, or oh my goodness, you stink and I don't even want to be around you because you're a smoker, without truly understanding, right? That possibly that's a step down from something else. And that person in front of them is doing everything they can to save them lives. And you've just done something that's triggered them that might make it. So, right? Okay. Right. He's going to quit smoking now because everybody hates it. I'm a stinky. Right. And I'll become an alcoholic instead, or I'll become a heroin addict, or I'll become a food addict, or a porn addict, or a shopping addict, right? So we're talking about genuine this week, and already I've been yabbering off. But sometimes that steam, like a tea kettle, it has to come through the top in order to get past it sometimes. And we should, in genuineness, be allowed to do that, right? I made that decision. Cindy, just do your live show already. But I came in and I did my live show with that still kind of bubbling there. So it could also even be an example to people out there because they could see the state that it put me in, that trigger, right? And it wasn't even a trigger for myself because I don't even smoke, but because I do baby steps, right? If you step down to something less severe than what you're delving into now in order to calm the system down, right? Even a little bit, because you can continue with those step downs. I believe in baby steps because I'm taking baby steps myself, right? I say enjoy the process. But the process is so heavy. So you have to be creative in order to be able to digest it, right? You have to do those baby steps in order to overcome ourselves. It's not to reject and deject ourselves, right? But to overcome those gaps that each one of us has in all aspects of ourselves, right? And I'm just showing that little bit of genuineness in me because, everybody has a handicap, right? Everybody has a disability, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, financial, right? We all have problems. And yet, yesterday, I opened up my mouth. I said, I judge, and I write in genuineness, and I can't take it back because it is a truth. It is a truth. But also in that idea that we talked about too, was it yesterday? We were talking a little bit, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Maybe this is a pride example because when we say things and in our mind, right, we're looking out, we're caring for people, we're looking for people's best interests. But in other people's mind, especially when they've been programmed with the guilt and the shame, right, to have it thrown into their faces and them to stumble with that movement, right? And especially when those ideas come from somebody we admire, somebody that we're taking influence by, right? So we got to be very, very careful when we judge, right? Because we don't know anybody's story, right? And this lesson that I learned growing up as a child, right? If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. It doesn't mean to let people get away with things, right? It just means not to pick at people's wounds, right? Not to pick at people's creative, adapt and conquer, never give up ways of trying to make a little bit of movement for themselves, right? It doesn't, somebody smoking cigarettes, it doesn't make them a bad person in any way, right? And I hope those cigarettes are calming the system down, right? And I'm not saying the cigarettes are a good thing, because I wouldn't have quit the cigarettes if it wasn't a good thing for me. But I get to make that judgment, right? And, you get to make that judgment for yourself. But then when we open up our mouths and say, well, you've got to live this way, you've got to dress this way, that habit is a stupid habit, right? That we can hurt people's feelings. And what we can do is we can stop people's movement. And not only stop people's movement, we can put people in a state of mind going, oh, whatever. Let's just go back to drinking. Let's just go back to gambling, right? And that's the last thing, right? And if you ever get that trigger, right, stop and think about it before you react, right? Before you react to it. Because, I'm not a big believer in turn the other cheek, but I do see the benefits, right, of not contributing to a conversation that you can clearly see is going to cause problems with somebody, just to feel like you're somebody else, or you want to belong to that it girl group or mean girl group, right? Right. And not to say that that was what it is, but sometimes it's that need to belong somewheres that we take up these ungenuine, right? Because that's what it is. We take up somebody else's perceptions and other people's ideas, and then we run with it. And the next thing you know, right, everybody's running around with baseball bats, whacking people upside the head, or trying to have a cigarette, right? Not realizing that cigarette is saving them from drinking a 40-ounce bottle of whiskey, or, right, something worse. I am grateful for how I step down, but each one of us gets to choose how we step down, right? How we step down. And we should be encouraged and congratulated in that process, right? And not chastised and made to feel guilt and shame, right? And I didn't mean to come in here like that. But at the same time, right, it is what it is. And that's my part of the genuineness. That's part of my promise to showing up here fresh like a loaf of bread every single day, because you guys will get to see whatever I'm dealing with in the moment, right? And you never know, right? There are things that trigger me too. And what happens when I get triggered and I say, oh, let's just go lies. And that trigger was, right, brought up my own guilt and shame, because it's something that I'm struggling with, right? And again, I have to think, right? Maybe that trigger was put into our lives to trigger us to say, hey, maybe you're ready for that next step down, right? Right? But what is that next step down? To each of us, it's going to be a little bit different, right? And I would like to think that one day that I'll be able to overcome myself, right? Without overcoming myself. You know what I mean? Like, right? Because it's only in our misunderstandings and those realizations of our misunderstandings that we have an opportunity to understand a little bit better. And it's in our choices, right? And it's in our choices. And I don't like to be triggered, and right, I try not to trigger people, but I know I do, right? But as we move up the ladder, and as we have more people that are depending on that good influence, right, we should check our P's and Q's, right? Because I would hate to be that person to pass on a little bit of something that wasn't true for somebody, and I represented it as, oh, I don't know, if you want to hang out with me, you better quit smoking, right? That's not the case. Not with me anyway. It takes all kinds to make the world. It takes all kinds to make the world. We're all overcoming together, but we're all in different levels of that overcoming, and we're all overcoming something different, aren't we? Right? But we're overcoming ourselves without overcoming ourselves, right? And if those selves are willing to show up, right, and have these kind of conversations, or at the very least, listen to these conversations, I would have to say that might be a pretty good step down, right? And maybe you'll become interested like I did, right? Where you are now doesn't have to be where you are next year. It doesn't have to be in 10 years. It doesn't even have to be where you're supposed to be in your next lifetime, right? It's just a matter of making those small changes, taking those baby steps, and creating the best human being we possibly can, and giving ourselves a little bit of rope to be able to do that, right? Okay, you guys. That's for good cheer. See you tomorrow. Bye bye. Oh my goodness.